So you're going to be practicing mixing different colors, and you should have downloaded a worksheet that looks like this. And notice it says, do not paint on this worksheet, make your own on watercolor paper. So you need to get yourself a sheet of the watercolor paper that you have. And notice that this paper is much heavier. We measure paper weight in pounds. So this is called 90-pound paper. And computer paper is typically, I believe, about 20 pounds. So it's considered a much lighter paper. And when we use watercolor paper, it's a lot more absorbent, like a paper towel. It's made to absorb water and not break down. So that's why it's important to use this instead. So you want to use this paper as a reference and start to block off all these different sections for each of these different colors that I'm asking for you to mix. So for example, I'm going to show you a couple here in the bottom section, and then we're going to work together through the video on a couple in this middle section. So your craftsmanship or your neatness doesn't have to be perfect with all of these boxes. I'm mostly concerned with how well you're mixing the colors and if you're keeping them transparent. You want to make sure you also label your boxes so that I make sure you understand which color is which. So I'll just label the top row here at the bottom section. Alright, so since I'm mixing only small areas of color, instead of using a big giant flat brush, I really can use this kind of medium-sized round brush instead to mix my colors. And I want to make sure I am using the lid or my palette to make these mixed colors. Well, I don't really have a lot of room on my palette, so I'm going to make some room. And what you can do if this ever happens to you, you can get a paper towel a little bit damp, squeeze it out, and just wipe off some areas so that you have some new workspace. Alright, so if you look here, it says dark green, and you're going to make it with green and brown. So what I would do is I'd make sure I get my brush wet, because watercolors need water to be activated. Get a little bit of green and stick it on my palette to mix with. And since I'm getting a new color, I have to wash out my brush. I'm going to make sure it's clean. Not quite yet. And then I want a little bit of brown. So brown and black, anytime you add them to a color, they invade very quickly. So you only need a tiny bit. You can always add more. That didn't really do much, so I'm going to make sure I add some more. And it should start to make a darker green. When I've got one I'm happy with, I'm going to spread it on my paper. So you can see that this green is much different than the one that comes straight out of the watercolor palette. I'll put them side by side just to show you a comparison. So this one is also transparent. What I just used is opaque, and I want to make sure that anytime I'm painting on this watercolor practice that I have transparent paint. If this happens to you where you create opaque paint by accident, you can add water to it and spread it around and it becomes transparent again. So you're going to look at the direction or the descriptions and mix together those colors to create each one of these and make sure you label them. Notice that when you have a light color, water is what you use instead of white to make something light. When you get up to this middle section, you're asked to create 5 different shades and tints of one color. So the one with the star is where you start. Let's say I'm going with green again. I'm going to create just a green on that box, and I want to make sure I make it transparent. So I'm going to add water to it. And then a tint is a color plus white. So this asks me to get more green, but only a tiny bit of water. So I'm actually going to pull some of this green. And if I add a little bit of water to it, it should get lighter. Lighter than this green. The next one is going to have a little bit more water. So I'm going to pick up some of this and add it to the next one. So each consecutive box should be a little lighter than the first. The last one has very little color and lots of water, so it's going to be just a slightly green tinted white piece of paper basically. Then in the opposite direction we have darker greens mixed with black. Those are called shades anytime you have a color with black in it. So, like we said before, when you're mixing a color with black or brown in it, you need very little black and brown. And I need to wash my brush between colors. And I'm only going to barely dab my brush in the black. And we'll see if this looks darker, just a little bit. Maybe I'll put a tiny bit more. I want it to be noticeable difference, but not drastic. So there's a darker green. The next one asks me to put a little bit more black in. So I'll just take a little bit more and add it to my pile here. So when you have your colors mixed and completed with labels, you're going to take a picture of it, upload it onto Tumblr, and make sure you tag it appropriately, and you'll be all set for the next assignment. Also, here's an example of what your colors might turn out to look like. They're a little bit opaque at the top here, but you can see down near the bottom what all these transparent colors should look like.